Well, with the increasing trend towards pre-poll voting, lots of South Australians have already voted, but tomorrow is election day, and most of the polls have shown that the Liberal government looks headed for defeat after just one term in power. They were elected 4 years ago in 2018. I can tell you there'll be another poll out late tonight from the Australian newspaper. The News poll will also show that Labor's leader, Peter Malinauskas, is heading to a victory. He joins us now live from a cafe in the inner northern suburb of Brompton. Good to talk to you, Peter. I suppose you want to talk down these polls. You've seen polls be wrong before, but so far there's no doubt that you are the out-and-out favourite here.
Well, Chris, you and I have both been following politics long enough, particularly in South Australia, to see poll after poll end up having a different result to the election outcome. And you're well familiar, Chris, that elections in South Australia tend to come down to a handful of votes and a handful of seats. And we believe those marginal seats will still be very tight come the results tomorrow. So we're continuing to fight for every last vote, continue to campaign, and hopefully the people of South Australia decide to back us in when the real poll matters, and that's tomorrow.
Well, the federal Labor leader, Anthony Albanese, has been in Adelaide, supposedly here to help you in the final 24 hours of the campaign, but he's not been seen today. He wasn't out campaigning with you. He hasn't done a media conference. Why not?
Oh, no, well, Albo was with me last night in the marginal seat of King around Golden Grove at the Village Tavern. It was really good to be able to press the flesh with punters in a pub. We were talking to people just enjoying their evening, and that was a really worthwhile experience. And then I had the opportunity to have a dinner with Albo, and all the media were well and truly present for that, let me tell you, Chris. And then this morning I understand Albo was handing out votes at pre-poll stations in another marginal seat again in the seat of Adelaide. So I'm very grateful to have Albo here in South Australia the last couple of days. We had him a little while ago again as well, so it's been great to have him on here on the ground. He's certainly popular in many quarters here in South Australia, and I certainly hope to see him.
Well, he can't be too popular. He can't be too popular. He's been in hiding. As you say, you did a picture opportunity last night. He didn't say anything to the media, didn't do a media conference, and he's effectively been hiding from the media today instead of being out and about with you. Obviously, he's hiding from the media because of this so-called Mean Girls bullying controversy.
Look, I can't speak for Albo, obviously, Chris, but I'm not too sure that's right. He did do a press conference last night. In fact, he was doing live crosses at 6 p.m. Adelaide time yesterday evening. He was interviewed at a pre-poll station where he came along knowing full well that the media was present. So Anthony always makes himself available to the media at every opportunity he gets, and I dare say he'll be doing that in the coming future. But as you would well expect, South Australians at the moment are turning their minds to who's going to lead our state into the future. And it's a big decision to make because there are lots of important issues at stake, none more so than the future of our health system, but also just as importantly, who has a plan for the future of our economy, because our state certainly is struggling at the moment with some economic headwinds.
Well, you would know Penny Wong very well. You would have known her your whole adult life. She's the leading figure, of course, of the socialist left in South Australia, so you deal with her all the time. You probably knew Kimberley Kitching too, as a fellow member of the Labor right and a prominent member at that. What's your take of these allegations of bullying and the way that factional divide seems to have been very ugly within the federal party?
Well, I only had the opportunity to meet Ms Kitching on a couple of occasions, so I couldn't profess to know her well. But I certainly do know Penny, Chris, and as most Australians know, Penny is a good woman, a person with outstanding Labor values and certainly committed to the cause of Labor and practices that. And I certainly am very grateful to have known Penny for as long as I have. She's a source of advice on occasions and clearly a very thoughtful individual. But as you, and this won't come as a surprise, Chris, but my whole world has been utterly immersed in state politics for a sustained period now, and that remains my focus in the lead up to an important state election.
Yeah, but this goes to the culture within the party, and it's the sort of culture in politics that Labor politicians, state and federal, have been talking about for the last year or so. And Penny Wong, as you know, I've known her a long while too, but she's admitted error here. She says she said something terrible to Kimberley Kitching and apologised about it. So doesn't the Labor leader federally need to come out and say something about this, address it, not try and bat it off? It perhaps requires some sort of inquiry into the culture within your party.
Well, look, Chris, as you would expect, I've been fully immersed in state politics, but taking what you're saying as given, if Penny has acknowledged that she said something that she regrets and she's apologised for it, I think that's a demonstration of her character. All of us in life aren't perfect, and I think South Australians and Australians more broadly like it when politicians are honest. But like I said, Chris, Penny is a good person, and I've known her for an incredibly long period of time, and I enjoy a really good relationship with Penny, and she's a good source of advice and thoughtfulness, and I hope that continues into the future. But, you know, Chris, there is so much at stake in our nation right now and our state, and when people approach the state election and the federal election, my sense is the question they're asking themselves is, who has a plan to realise the extraordinary opportunity we have as a country on the back of the pandemic?
I do want to get onto the state election contest, but I just got to ask you one last question on that. Do you know where Anthony Albanese is at the moment? I'm wondering whether he might be hiding behind one of those plants behind you.
No, he's not. And as you well know, Chris, Albo is out and about everywhere across the country. I think he was in 3 different locations yesterday. He told me over dinner last night, and he was certainly in Adelaide this morning helping out. And no doubt you'll be seeing Anthony very soon because he's always available to the media.
Indeed. Now, about this state election, as I say, you're favoured. We'll see. But you made, I thought, a very cut-through comment about the leadership of the government in South Australia during the pandemic on Wednesday night at the Leaders Forum. You said the only time the government looked good was when other people were in charge, referring to the way that Stephen Marshall allowed the Chief Medical Officer, Nicola Spurrier, and the Police Commissioner, Grant Stevens, to effectively run the state through the pandemic. Now, does that mean if you're sworn in as Premier next week, you will push them aside and be front and centre on pandemic measures so that you are the one responsible and accountable for all those decisions?
Well, I think premiers are elected to lead. I mean, that's the fundamental tenet of the position, is to lead. If you become the Premier or the Prime Minister in our federation, a lot of authority is invested in you, and you've got a responsibility to provide leadership using that authority consistent with the best interests of your constituents. What I've said previously, Chris, and maintains my position, that if I do become the Premier, I will chair the Transition Committee in conjunction with Grant Stevens and Nicola Spurrier. But if I'm on that committee, my intention is to chair it. But the critical issue, of course, is that the legal framework that exists in South Australia around the authority to put in restrictions in place is entirely invested in the Police Commissioner through the Emergency Management Act. And what we've seen every 28 days is a constant renewal of that Emergency Management Declaration. And I don't think anyone believes that is sustainable in the long term for another year or, heaven forbid, another 2 years. Which is why at the beginning of the last year I supported Stephen Marshall.
Shouldn't the power rest with the Premier?
Yeah. Well, at the beginning of last year, Chris, Stephen Marshall said, we're going to change that act. We're going to amend it because it's not fit for purpose anymore. And I said, I'm all in. I was happy to provide that support. And then that effort from the Premier fell by the wayside because of the internal brawling going on within the South Australian branch of the Liberal Party. So look, if I do become the Premier, my intention will be to quickly sit down with the Police Commissioner and understand exactly what work had been done prior to that internal brawl within the Liberal Party, to examine what the option, thanks mate, to discuss exactly what the options are to see a different arrangement in place that provides the legal authorities that are necessary, but also makes sure we've got an Emergency Management Act in place that reflects the current situation, which of course is not sustainable.
Now, there's been a big argument about ambulance ramping. Some of your ads have said it's worse now than ever, but it was worse a few months ago and it's been on the way down. What level of ambulance ramping would you put up with as Premier? If there's any ramping at the major hospitals at all, will you regard that as a failure?
No, we want to get ambulance ramping down to the levels that we start to see responses to 000 calls being met on time. And that's the key metric, Chris. So, a bit of context. At the change of government 4 years ago, Stephen Marshall inherited ambulance response times that were 85% on-time performance. And the first couple of weeks of this year, that collapsed to 33%. So only on 1 of 3 occasions are South Australians calling 000 and getting the ambulance on time for a P2 emergency. That's what's got to change. I mean, ramping is a big problem, right? But the problem flows on in a very material way to the average South Australian when they call 000 for a loved one, and the ambulance takes sometimes hours late. We had a case the other day. It was a lights and sirens emergency, and the ambulance took over 2 hours to arrive. I mean, in a first world country, that represents state failure at its worst, and we've got a plan to fix it.
Peter Malinauskas, thanks so much for joining us. We will see what the morrow brings. I hope you get some sleep.
Who knows, Chris? You and I both know that politics, anything can happen, but I do feel confident that we put our best foot forward, and I've got a united, fresh team, and we're very comfortable with putting our faith in the judgment of the South Australian people.